3, 2, 1.
Very active in Los Angeles right now as an art major, as an artist.
I'm here in Katoomba in New South Wales talking to the artist Watt. And Watt, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you for coming to the mountains.
Yeah. This is the first time I've been here for about 20 years.
Yes, so we looked at the Three Sisters.
Yeah, we did. Took a selfie. Got asked to get out of the way by the tourists. It's actually quite funny that I've been doing this project now for about 5 or 6 years, and we've only just got around to actually doing an interview because you and I have known each other, I think, for around about 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
When we met working in
Campbelltown Arts Centre.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning of your art career, because you've travelled around quite a bit, in a way. Including Hamilton and before then Perth, and now over the last 5 years or more, actually 8 years, up in the Blue Mountains. So tell me sketch out your career trajectory as it has been to date.
Okay, well, I went to the National Art School and I was there. I finished in 92. Straight after then I went to Perth and was over there for about 4 years. So that was the first few years out of art school where I just, that's where everybody has to keep painting.
Just to go back a step then, when you went to the National Art School, you probably would have gone to National Art School around about the same time I went to Sydney College of the Arts. And if anyone has been educated in the arts in Sydney, they'll be familiar with a kind of a triad of art schools, which tends to be Sydney College, National Art School, and back then it was City Art Institute or College of Fine Arts. National Art School was much more known for its kind of atelier approach to art education. Have you found that that's kind of given you a particular approach to your work?
Absolutely. I think it was the right art school for me at that time. Because I had grown up in Sydney Southwest, and as a creative person I felt quite alone really, and then ending up living in Darlinghurst and going to that place was pretty much kind of a paradise. And what they did have there, I'm not sure how it works with the other colleges, but a lot of the teachers were practicing artists, so they were just casual. They'd come in and the focus was on studio. So it was life drawing, and I majored in painting, and I had some extraordinary teachers that I still think, when I think of them, I still feel encouraged to paint. People like John Peart and Aida Temescu, Ron Lambert. It was, the aesthetic of the place was pretty much abstract expressionism, lyrical abstraction. And although that kind of language, it only existed in my practice for a very short time, but in some ways I think that's a good language to learn to paint in terms of just fundamentals, composition, colour. So it was a very hands-on school, and I think that's helped me to be in the studio since that moment, because that was always part of being at NAS. You were always in the studio. So then after, it was easy just to stay in the studio. Actually, one thing I did do when I was at NAS in my third year, when I was majoring in painting, so painting was pretty much all I was doing. I don't know if you'd get away with this now, but I said to the teachers, I'm enjoying painting so much at home, how about if I just don't come here for the next 6 months and I paint at home? And I think, I'd proved to them by that time that I was a very committed painter. So they said, and I just showed up at the end of the year with these works that I was doing on masonite that I ended up sort of hanging from the ceiling, and that was kind of taking that 6 months off broke me out of the aesthetic of the college, and then I went back and was assessed by those people. But yeah, it was the place that taught me you have to be in the studio. So I guess that's probably the differentiation between those colleges.
Which is kind of a discipline thing, isn't it?
Very much, very much. And I was a very disciplined student, and it was around the same time that I started playing classical guitar. I played kind of rock and roll before that, and was in a band and all that stuff that you do as a teenager. And then I heard the Bach Chaconne on classical guitar, and I just said, right, I'm selling my Fender Telecaster, my Fender amp, bought a classical guitar. Back then I remember I was getting up at 4 a.m. every morning and doing about 6 hours playing before I'd start painting. I was very motivated, and those things fed each other, and they still do, even more so. Because I remember it was a constant feeling, what am I going to do? Am I going to try and push for the concert guitarist thing, which in truth I was probably too old by the time, virtuosos start very young. But I had this dilemma, will I be a painter or a guitar player? And it just evaporated over time that you can be both and they can feed each other.
A few years ago when you had the show at the National Art School, which was kind of a survey of, it's almost too early in your career really to call it retrospective, but it was essentially a retrospective. Yeah. And as part of that you actually played Chaconne in the gallery. And it's interesting now, I didn't realise that you were learning that at the same time as well. So I can see the two are kind of...
Yeah, and in so many different ways, classical music is so complex, painting is so complex. So they have different relationships over the years. Like when I was doing the Bach stuff, I was only listening to Bach, and then Bach was obsessed with the number 32, and that would be his suites, and there's 32 variations in the Chaconne. So then that would feed into... I would have to do 32 variations on whatever I was working on. So that was a very straightforward kind of combining of the two. But now, the painting that I'm doing now, which is so thin, and it's all about the amount of paint on the brush, the pressure, and it's so similar to how, classical guitar technique is, where you have the point of how much flesh, how much nail, how much pressure. It's a really strong correlation between the two, and that's sort of at that particular point of decision making is where the picture or the music is formed. So, yeah.
And interesting as well that you were learning classical guitar at the same time that you were studying art at an art school, which was largely concerned with things like abstract and formalist sort of questions to do with aesthetics.
Yep.
Because there's, I think, obvious. When you get into abstraction, there's an obvious, much stronger link between what you're doing when you paint and when you produce music. I think.
Yeah. I think one way, sometimes I will start with an image from the world. Which kind of, I guess, could resemble a score that you then interpret in the picture. But what I'm doing now is not starting with anything, and which is more of a kind of improvised way of building a form without, So yeah, there's a lot to think about in the correlations of the two, and it definitely informs my practice daily.
When you went to Perth, a lot of the work that you did became much more sculptural, 3D work. What happened at that point, do you think, to make you think in that way?
Well, I think when I mentioned before about spending the last 6 months at art school at home, it was just, I needed to break, I had such good teachers, I had absolute respect for their work, but I just questioned everything. And I think when I went to Perth, the resolution or the answer to that question about where I was going to take painting was to stop painting, because I'd just been saturated with painting for the previous 3 years, and it was just a matter of the subject matter that I was choosing had a better fit in other mediums. So I didn't really know how much further I could push painting, because I'd sort of pushed it a lot, and they were very minimal in the way that they were installed, quite sculptural as well. So I was well on my way to a sculptural body of work. But there's probably more so the subject matter just I didn't feel was suited to painting. But
because I'm thinking also that when you returned back to Sydney, and probably one of the most monumental works you've actually done is the buried truck. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that kind of started when I'd been in Perth for a few years, and I decided to ride my motorcycle back to Sydney, and I'd struggled, I guess, I didn't know where the subject matter was going by the time that I left Perth, and I think it was that solo motorcycle ride across the Nullarbor, and just hours and hours, and you've just got truck, and my dad was a truck driver, and all my life he was a truck driver, and arriving back to the family home, there was Dad and the physicality of a prime mover, which is something that it had just always been around me. It was that ride that I thought, this is it, trucks, something that I think when you first go to art school, and you think about the high arts, and earlier I wouldn't have picked it as a subject matter, but I think as you grow as an artist and you become more accepting of the possibilities of your practice, trucks was perfect. And I went on to make quite a few shows based around trucks, and I guess inherently my relationship with my father and the buried truck. He had been involved in a protest in 1979 where they blocked the Razorback Mountain. There was several issues, economical, and the government had a road tax that was basically making truck driving unfeasible. So they blocked the highway for, I think it was 10 days, and I think it remains the biggest act of civil disobedience in Australia. So, I'm very, very proud of my father. So it was 21 years on, so 2000, and I went to the site and thought, how do you possibly represent this as a monument? Is this working class revolt? And I went through so many different possibilities, but then it was just the truck itself and this enormous piece of capital, and the way that the memory of the roadblock existed, and just by sort of taking it and burying it, so there's just this sort of presence of this thing below us that's been rendered unusable. And the process was extraordinary, going to local council to get approval and funding, getting a truck. I remember going to the council meeting. I don't know if they still do this. So this is out near Picton. I'm sure they played, it was either Advance Australia Fair or God Save the Queen on a turntable record at the start of the council meeting. And I think we all stood up, and I just thought, this is going to be so hard to convince them of the language of contemporary art. Well, there's so many possibilities in that, but that this was my work, and it's an important work, and although there's not going to be anything really to see once the work is complete, it was important. And there were people there with enough foresight that I think I had a couple of meetings that I had to go to, and then, they said yes and gave me funding, and I think now there's a rock there with the plaque, and it's sort of become a bit council-ified, but yeah, it was a really beautiful and important work for me, and it's one that I still look back really fondly on. And the energy it must have taken.
And the interesting thing is that all of that, the energy that it took, and you know the size of the actual object and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yet it's complete. It's buried.
Yeah.
Underground.
I know.
So it's invisible. Yeah.
And when do you get involved in projects like that, where you're doing so much administration, you forget about a lot of the more loftier ideas of your argument. And it wasn't until a bit later that I thought, well, you know, it was a monument to this 70s blockade, and it was actually using the language of that time, a sort of conceptual art, earth art, you know, those kind of things went into the mix somehow along the way, probably obviously unconsciously. So yeah, works like that, they're so big, it can take you a long time to actually work out, you know, every little bit of what it meant to you, and you know, without even going into the relationship with my father. So yeah, we have a very good relationship, by the way.
When we first met, I actually did a catalogue essay for an exhibition that was at the Campbelltown Arts Centre.
Oh yes.
For Mothertrucker.
Yes.
And tell me a bit about that exhibition, because that was also...
Yeah, wow, that's...
sort of expanding
like a long time ago, doesn't it? Even
Yeah.
the word Mothertrucker.
About 15, 16...
Well, that came directly after the truck burial, because I remember we had a video of the burial in the show. So yeah, I was continuing to work with the truck subject matter. The major pieces in that show were, again, it was this sort of absence of a truck. We're in the main gallery at Campbelltown. I constructed all of the lights on a prime mover on individual stands, and you'd walk into the space and you'd feel that this prime mover was coming directly at you, but well, you know, once your eyes adjusted, you could, you know, walk straight through, you could, you know, penetrate this most masculine of objects. And then it was, the lights were also lighting up on the wall. There was a 13-meter print of an erect penis, and it was printed on the tarpaulins the trucks have on the side of them, you know, often advertising. So yeah, again, it was a look at a truck as this, you know, don't really like to. I just feel so different about that work now. Back then, it had very clear definitions, because it was part of my master's thesis that I was doing at the time, which was kind of looking at masculinity and my own voyage through that in Sydney Southwest. So yeah, I think I wouldn't like to say too much actually about the penis work. I think that it's better as something to be considered.
I've often wondered since that show what you've actually done with that.
It's in storage.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I've been told, I think actually you told me years ago, that one very daring collector will come along and offer you a fortune for it. So
Yeah, you never know.
I still think it's a good work, it's a strong work.
Yeah.
And I've shown it since. I haven't shown it for quite some time now, but yeah, I think the NAS survey show was the last time. And it fitted into that body of work then okay as well, in terms of scale anyway.
I remember at the time you were talking about potentially actually putting it on a truck and taking a picture of it in the landscape.
Yeah, you know, that would be nice, but I just feel like, you know, I've moved on so much.
Yeah.
Again, it'd be putting so much energy into a work that's already, you know, I think a younger artist should come along and do that, do a collaborative work with me, and they can deal with council.
Yeah.
And the law.
All the problems around pixelation and...
Yeah.
So after Mothertrucker, then you you've always worked a lot in more 2D work. Not necessarily painting, you've actually done 2D works that are actually quite sculptural, collage-like. How you've done less sculptural work since then.
Yep.
So
Yep.
what happened that led you into this trajectory?
Yeah, I think so after that I did I was a resident artist at Wollongong City Gallery directly after the Mothertrucker show, and because those works had been all sculptural, I was just really keen to get back into painting, and probably the big work that I did then was the instrument for measuring the universe, which was a 4.5 meter by 2 meter work, which was an image of white noise off a television screen, and I think it was something like 2 years to paint, because there was literally 1 million pixels on the piece to paint, and it's one of those paintings that took so long, and you spend so much time involved in the process, and I love that time, because that time for me is always where all of the new ideas are suggested. You're so locked in, you know this picture inside out, you know, you actually quite a mechanical process to putting it together, so you've got all this free time to think, and just painting an image of white noise on that scale just, I guess, reminded me that painting was infinite, and that it was time to just really push painting, and that was the picture that got me back into the endless possibilities of picture making.
One of the things I've realised talking to a lot of artists over the years as well is the process is like, you know, the applying those dots over the course of 2 years, and also, you know, often preparatory processes like gessoing a canvas and other things that you might actually do, as well as being useful in the most direct sense that it's part of the production of the work, tend to be useful as a way of disengaging the brain, so that, you know, it's almost like creating a space, a mental space that allows ideas to form.
Yeah, well, you just walked through that room there, which is, I've just made completely bare while I've been gessoing 8 new canvases for a new singular picture. They'll all be together, and the importance of me having an empty room to gesso in before I start a picture is a luxury. But what you say, that's exactly right, and also there was the picture behind me, which was a picture that pretty much took me a year to paint, post the silver birches, which we may talk about later. But one thing I've really noticed, and I guess this relates to that, after a show, I always think that, okay, you've had this show, you need to do a picture immediately and start work. But it never happens, and I get so I just feel so defeated, and I need to realize that it's just a constant. It's part of my practice. After every show, sure, experiment, but don't expect anything. That's because, you know, you'd be familiar with my shows. As the next show comes along, often it'll look like it's painted by a different artist, and I think it's, for me, it's that's how I keep excited about painting. Like I need to make a picture that I haven't seen before, and that's hard. So, and I'm really fearful of any form of repetition. So there needs to be this big cutoff point, and for things to arise. So this one is the first one to come after that break. Although I did do the Robert Forster portrait in between, but that was so different. That's like a one-off thing. Like, I'm not a portrait painter. I don't see myself as a portrait painter. I do it because it's an enormous challenge. I did that one because I wanted to meet Robert Forster again. I'd painted him earlier. So yeah, that it's not even really part of your practice. For me, that component, that's what I should do. I should do something completely different. And just waiting on the other stuff to process. And then, like, once this picture came, I was probably the most delighted human being in the world for 5 minutes, because it had come, and, you know, that terrible dive over such a long time, and you know, throughout that whole time you're so full of expectation. And then the longer it goes on, it's just, am I ever going to be able to make a picture again? So I think, you know, that's, and it just takes so long, and, you know, I'll have a show and then I'll do the same thing again, and I'll be full of regret.
This, you know, this is such a common thing. I've interviewed so many artists where they talk about, you know, particularly like the day after the opening of an exhibition, and okay, I need to and how impossible they find that.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, even though I've given up, being a practicing artist, as a writer, I find that when I launched, we had the launch of the Sean Gladwell book
Yep.
at Sherman Contemporary Art Foundation in 2015, and the next day, it was actually weird. Actually, I found it almost traumatic and depressing.
Yep.
The next day, I felt just this, extraordinary empty kind of feeling. And what I'd expected to feel like an achievement just seemed to kind of completely be hollow and fall into a heap. And then you recover from that. But I wonder if that part, is that necessary?
Well, I mean,
process?
everybody talks about that post-exhibition blues. It's just, I think for some people it carries on longer. Is it a day? Is it a year? And yeah, I don't really have an answer to that. You get to a point where you just start living in hope. I remember watching the months go past, and I had a blank canvas on the wall here. I had all the paint set up, but I didn't have a single thing to say, or a single thing that I thought I hadn't said before, rather. So yeah, it takes time. But I think the older you get, you don't mind that painting is such a slow process. There's all those slow food movements and things like that, and I was thinking, I'm really into slow painting. really, really slow painting.
It's a good you're not a photographer then.
No.
So tell me about the silver birches then, because that's now getting closer to where you're at the moment.
I guess just briefly, there was quite a few shows after that when I went to Gallery 9, and I had a really good time at that gallery. Did you want to go over some of those quickly?
Yeah, okay. Definitely.
Because some of those shows were quite pivotal, I think, for my practice. The first one that I had with Gallery 9 remains one of my favourite shows, Casual Library Assistant, which is my day job. So I again, in that one there was quite sculptural pieces. There were a lot of suicide machines for staff and patrons alike to use in the library. There were drawings of patrons. There was a suicide letter, which was my resignation from the job. So it was a look at how difficult it is, with some humour I guess, for a practicing artist to keep a day job, but also I think it was positive in terms of how that day job is part of your life, and how that could influence the practice and be a subject matter in itself. So you could find some joy in doing the support process of being an artist, which is the day work. So there was that one. There was Satanism was a show. That was the first time I'd showed the Berkshire Con, and it was a video projected onto the wall in black and white, but we turned off the sound, so there was just this performance of 20 minutes of silent playing. There were a few other shows. From that first point, they again went into pure painting shows, and they just kept becoming more and more restricted. And until the very last one that I had at Gallery 9, which was 102 paintings for Mum and Dad, which was small pictures. I was sort of doing one a day, trying to... I was quite affected when John Peart died. He'd been a friend of mine, a painter that I'd really, really admired. And I think I started that series, would have been within weeks of hearing about it and going to his funeral, and I just felt an enormous loss of him and an enormous loss to Australian painting. And I think I just started kind of playing around with things within John's language, the lyrical abstraction, and then the whole thing kind of blossomed. But so that was the last painting show that I had with them, and then came the Birches with York Crowley. So there was 9 in total, and they were all the same image of a singular silver birch. and the process again was very, very slow, just working with primaries and pretty much changing the brush and the hue after every brush stroke, and building up this kind of rhythm. And I've said they look quite a lot to me like a suite of Baroque dances where they're all kind of in the same key, but there's this wonderful rhythm over the suite.
Was it just they were there? I mean, they're around your environment here in
Well,
the
the Birch
mountains?
is actually just outside the back door, and there's something about their kind of the melancholy of their slight lean. They're just a beautiful, beautiful tree. And also, I guess formally, in terms of what I wanted to do, like the tiny leaves that they had would let me use the process of this really ambiguous space with the primaries. Like, I think it was interesting to take a natural image, but to render it in a way which had no care or concern for how it actually existed in space, so that when you look at them, you know, it's the fact that it's a tree is really irrelevant. It was just a way of using this process that I wanted to, and you know, this kind of space did articulate a tree, but in a very kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure how you would describe what they were. How would you describe what they were doing spatially?
To me, they seem. I mean, they're on a raw canvas, aren't they?
Yeah.
So to me, they seem to be almost in the original sense, you know, the original 20th century European painting sense of an abstraction, in that they seem to be doing something with painting, using the birch as a complex visual token in a way, which actually serves as...
It's a bit like sort of scaffolding, sort of holding up these abstracted forms in space that eventually will return to signifying a tree, I guess.
Now you mentioned there about it being a bit like a Baroque composition, and you've got music on, you know, as we speak, and you know your studio has large speakers. And one of the things that I've realised over the course of these interviews over the years is the importance, to some artists, not all, but importance to a lot of artists of having music when they're working. So tell me a little bit about that, the place of listening to music when you're creating.
Again, it's very different. On larger pictures, if I've got a particular process going, where the engagement is not as full as when you're doing sort of like an improvised piece. Music's very important. You know, I'm not like synesthetic or anything like that. I think it's just a real love of, you know, I pretty much predominantly listen to classical music now, and I think it's just, you know, the music is so complex that through the duration of a picture I can actually get to know a great Beethoven work, or but I also do talking books and things like that as well.
Do you, when you look at the surface of a painting you've worked on whilst listening to a piece of music, get a kind of a memory of the music as you were listening to it? 'Cause I find a little bit of that myself. You know, I'll look at something and I'll remember, you know, when I was doing that bit over there, I was listening to, you know, this goes to show how long it's been since I've painted, but, you know, Bert Newton was on the TV in the morning, and now I can think of what Bert was talking about when does that happen? Yeah,
I wouldn't say that I see it in the picture. I remember the most immediate one would be the silver birches, and I'd just come across Lana Del Rey.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd heard that video game song, and I thought, you know, this is an insignificant sort of pop star, and then got this album called Ultraviolence, gave it a listen, thought, yeah, that's terrible, gave it another listen, and then all of a sudden, this is fantastic. You know, those transformative records that you can't stand, and all of her records are sort of like that. Anyway, so when I did the Birches, I think I had 4 albums by her that I just had on high rotation. yeah, I was absorbed. I was in love. So yeah, I think it's probably in the same way that, you know, when you get a record and you play it to death, and then, you know, it'll always have that place in time when, you know, there was the summer of whenever. That's when that record and then all the associated memories and friends or whatever go with that more so than the actual picture.
Do you think the music affects the work in some way, or to some extent, when you put that music on, you're making that choice based on what you're doing on the canvas?
Yeah, well, just the other night on ABC FM, they played the Gurecki thing that we're listening to now, Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. And I heard it and I thought, oh my God, that is the soundtrack for this larger picture that I'm about to start. And I was seeing these as kind of these sorrowful forms, and I just thought, wow, this is a big symphonic piece that goes for an hour. This is going to be really tasty for the commencing of the picture anyway. So yeah, definitely in that instance. Although, like, I remember I was going through a period of doing lots and lots of dark glazes and really tonal stuff, and I was working in the garage at the back because they were really large, and it was just the drones. That was all I could listen to, this loud, abrasive, very literary Australian rock and roll, who are, you know, a wonderful band. And it was, again, just every album on high rotation constantly, and the whole show was painted to the drones. So yeah.
In terms of, you know, like your structure of your work day,
Mm-hmm.
do you have like a 9 to 5 studio kind of work day, or most people it's more like 11 to 7?
Yes, that's a variable. What I like to do, I like to get up before midday. I won't put a time on it. I find when I'm working best, I will do guitar technique first, even if it's just half an hour, scales and right hand exercises, and that's a way of basically tuning me as much as tuning the instrument. And then, yeah, the rest is completely variable. You know, it's hard to give you a studio schedule when a year of that time has been staring at a blank canvas, which is, you know, part of that process. But I generally paint at night, and lately it's been sort of 2 to 3 in the morning, just that sort of late silence. You know, I can't hear anything. You know, you don't hear much in the Blue Mountains anyway, but at that time of night it is wonderful. And yeah, just the other night I did one till the sun came up, I think, working on this, and I felt like a teenager again. It's like I should be on drugs or somewhere. But no, I was being productive. So yeah, definitely a nighttime painter. So here we are at my storage facility. This is the work that I thought we'd just make a bit of a mention of, because it relates to what we're talking about with the National Arts School. There's 4 panels, so it's close to 9 meters long. But what it is all of these fragments. These are pretty much all the paintings that I did in second year at the National Arts School. And then I put them in my parents' shed and forgot about them for about 20 years. And then Dad's like, what are you going to do with these pictures? And he brought them all up to me. And I looked at them and thought, oh my God, that is the language of the National Arts School in all these different stretches that I had. And obviously this was many years on since then, and my painting had changed dramatically. But I thought in them was my education. So I cut them all up into these components, and I'd been working with liquid nails, this industrial adhesive, this beautiful brown. I'd done a series of those pictures, so I thought if I cut up the language of my youth and kind of reconstruct it with where I'm at now, and as it grew, it just became this sort of fantastical, swirling landscape. And it's called Ritual Performance of the Ancestors, which is from the Stravinsky Rite of Spring. And I remember at the end of that piece, there's like these sort of chords. And I remember listening to the piece, and again it relates to what you were saying about the impact of music, and I'd sort of see all these forms that were like marching along and being spotlit as the chords were coming along, and I guess and that title also invokes the language that my teachers were passing on to us. Do you have any questions about this one?
Well, you reminded me of a group of works that you did, which I never mentioned, and in fact I can see a couple of them at the back there as well, which was Liquid Nails.
Mm.
I think they're kind of interesting because they lie on the border between being sculptural.
Mm. Mm. Well, they were, I think I've gone down, all the different paths that I've gone down, they're always towards a different way of a reductive process, reducing painting to as little as I possibly could, and a lot of those are just kind of monochromatic glue pools, and colour had been eradicated, composition had been eradicated, basically all of the processes of painting had been eradicated, and then there was this series of this rather sinister looking glue. So yeah, that was another important body of work for me, and that sort of also led to, they're all wrapped up at the moment, but they're works on raw canvas. Did you see with the singular marbles in the middle?
No.
I'll have to send you an image. Mm. And again, that was just condensing the pigment to the sphere of the marble in the middle of the raw linen. So yeah, that's been something that I've been constantly engaged with in terms of how little you can do for it to be a painting. Mm. But this seems to be doing a lot.
So were you saying that is actually a canvas that was from when you were at National Art School?
So there was heaps of them. There was all the second year work when I was really learning the language of abstract expressionism, and then and that's an interesting point that you say, like, is it from one, or because the language was so similar in all of them, because that's what that language is. Well, for me at that period in my practice anyway. So yeah, there's I don't know, maybe 30 canvases that have all been cut up.
It's interesting for me because, I mean, when did you go to National Art School again?
90 to 92.
Yeah. I went to Sydney College of the Arts from 91 to 94, mm-hmm. and we were very much engaged in the idea that painting was a discourse, it wasn't an activity as such, and the idea of the death of painting was still predominant in those days. Yep. And it's interesting to look at the types of canvases that were in your parents' garage at the end of the process compared to what are still in my parents' garage, which are very, they're minor, they're figurative, they're appropriation, they're kind of ironic. Yep. It's got postmodern shit written on. Absolutely.
Yeah. So contrasting.
Yeah, and incredibly formative, and I mean that in the sense that I think that what you came out with was a sense of painting as as infinite possibility. I think what I came away from, and this isn't to say that other students necessarily did this, because there have been some great painters that came out of SCA while I was there.
Sure.
But I think what I came out of it was a sense that painting was so incapable as a medium of saying anything meaningful that I actually gave up and became a theorist. So it pushed me in that direction. I just, it makes me wonder sometimes if I had gone National Arts or to go for,
Likewise.
where would I
I could be on the other side of the camera. Yeah, I still really like this picture, and just having that thread of your education, and in some ways, maybe this started out as a National Art School picture and became a COFA picture through its appropriation of itself. Increasingly, and looking at this picture, what I'm starting to see in my practice, which is actually a really lovely thing to understand, for me to understand about it, is that I'm kind of still working on all of these pictures at once. I keep them in storage, but there's something in the back of my mind that is still working on the picture. And the one inside, the spider portrait, I've gone into that 3 times now. Pretty much all the pictures that I've got, I'm going back every couple of years, and I'm actually finding that really exciting. The fact that these are still all in progress. I guess you only really stop if it gets sold.
I've got an artist that I've interviewed a few times in LA called Max Bresnil, and he always says that until it's sold, it's fair game.
Yeah.
And he's had incidents where the gallery website has got a reproduction of an image, and then when the person buys it, they go, actually, this is different from what's on the
Yeah. Actually, there's a picture at York Crowley that I've got there now that I've just worked out what it needs. So when I drop off the next bunch of pictures, I'll pick that one up and bring it back and go back into it. And I think that's good. And I think if it works, like I think it has with the that new portrait, is that you're starting to get, the depth that you get over different, times in your practice of going back into that picture when things have changed. You never would have resolved that picture that way because you didn't have the tools or the understanding to do it. So I think it actually builds really complex, interesting pictures. For sure.
Oh, you didn't tell me about the Robert Forster portrait. Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about? You said that you were interested in meeting him.
Yeah, well, I had painted him and Grant in 2005 when the Go-Betweens were still a band. And then it was just coincidence. The Clarendon Hotel, which is just up on the corner, years ago, Gareth Lydiard from the Drones, he came and played there, and being a fan of his solo work and the band, I asked him and I painted his portrait, and then I ended up hanging that picture at the Clarendon, and as a deal that I would be able to go to all shows free. So I was amazed to see that Robert Forster was coming to play there, and I spoke to him after the gig, and then he was very interested, and so the next day we did the sitting, and it was just a continuation of the language of the Birches. It was the raw linen, the primaries, but the whole new problem of having a figure and a likeness. And this is why I don't do these things very much. I think for me, that's not something that I want to spend my energy on in a picture, getting a likeness. That's why I don't paint people very often. I want to explore other ideas. But yeah, so that was just a very much one-off after the Birches to, waiting to see what would happen next.
There's a sense of, I think, your vintage
absolutely
within that.
Well, I remember in the 80s, like I was very much into the whole English New Romantic, the Smiths and all that, and then the Go-Betweens were like, the Australian poetic version. They had that New Romantic coolness, but could use Australia as a subject matter and the sound. But both them and the Triffids always talked about as being these two bands that had the Australian vernacular, and you know, and they went overseas. And I think it was just inspiring for me as, you know, a baby artist in the 80s, seeing this quality of work happening in Australia, and also the Birthday Party and the Bad Seeds and things like that. But yeah, the Go-Betweens, very, very significant band to me. Still remember dancing around to their music and, you know, working on my hair. And
would you do the Archibald again?
Don't know. What I guess the only way I would do it is, Robert is such a striking person, and I've spoken to him about this because I've done him twice now. I like the idea of the same person popping up in your practice every time that you reach a new language. Hey, let's do a Robert, and just to have this sort of collection of Roberts in you know, whatever I'm working on at the time. And you know, in terms of the subject matter, he is great. You know, he's so tall and handsome and smart and talented, and yeah. So maybe if that happened, and you know, if it's a good picture.
Well, great. Thanks for talking to me today, and it was good seeing you after all these years.
You too. An absolute pleasure.
Yeah, maybe we'll do it again in another 10. Thanks.